Hello everyone! Welcome back to the supporters funded Q&A. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. If you didn't know, you're new around here, haven't seen one of these videos before, every month I do a video responding to questions asked by my supporters, whether they be YouTube members or patrons on Patreon, where you guys ask me questions about my life, my interests, just various different things, and then every month I answer them for you guys to discuss and enjoy, and maybe even strike up a conversation about in the comments if you have some sort of response to a question that I answered. So if you want to be able to ask questions of me for these videos, consider joining on my YouTube members or on Patreon. Any tier is fine, as long as it's at the $5 tier or above on Patreon, and there's only one tier on YouTube, so that makes it easy. And you'll be able to answer, and you'll be able to ask questions that I'll then answer just like this. So if you're interested in that, links are below in the description. But with all that said, let's start answering some questions, shall we? The first question today comes from King Tony, a YouTube member, saying, are there any skill combinations in Final Fantasy XVI that you found had some really cool synergies? Since I finished the game, it's been really fun to see people mess around and have that aha moment. And I mean, yeah, there's obviously a ton of different stuff that you can do in Final Fantasy 16. The main thing that I've found that I've enjoyed the most, and the build that I've been using right now, has been a combination, and I guess spoilers, if you haven't finished Final Fantasy 16, I feel like I'm behind most people at this point, but the combination that I've been using and my current build that people might have seen in the stream is the following. We've got Ifrit's Will of the Wykes, the little spinning defensive fire orbs, Titan's Counterpunch, Bahamut, with Satellite and Giga Flare, because, like, come on. And then Rama with, what is it? Not Levin Bolt. Judgment Bolt, of course. Judgment Bolt. And it all revolves around Lightning Rod. Lightning Rod has been by far my favorite ability in the game, just because it deals such ridiculous damage and it provides such a level of utility. Not only is it something that you can hit to trigger to do big bursts of electricity around it, but if the enemy hits it, it hits them back even harder. And, as chat pointed out to me, you can move it around. You don't have to wait for the cooldown to go and come back up and be able to replace it. So long as the Lightning Rod is currently active, you can reactivate the ability and move it wherever you want. And that has allowed me to do so much insane stuff with just nuking down stagger bars. It's really insane. Like, the fact that you can put down the Lightning Rod, activate Will of the Wykes, which then just starts immediately triggering the Lightning Rod. You can start Titan punching it over and over and over. You can blast it with Giga Flare to trigger it and deal obviously massive damage in its own right. And all of that together near instantly nukes a stagger bar to put an enemy in stagger so you can wail on them even harder. Or if they're already down and you do this, will do an insane amount of damage and also shoot their multiplier through the roof. God forbid you be using Limit Break while this is happening, because all of your damage is multiplied even more. I mean, there's a couple examples from my most recent stream where there were bosses, or at least enemies, that had stagger bars that we just nuked. They were just gone. One rotation of my abilities, and they were wiped off the face of the earth. I haven't had the chance to really try it against a proper boss. We had it set up a little bit against one of the S-rank hunts. Wasn't as useful because that was an enemy that moved around a lot, so the Lightning Rod wasn't always able to be hitting it. But still, I mean, it's an awesome combination of stuff. There's definitely other things that I want to do as well. I want to mess more with Phoenix. I want to get back to using things like Heat Wave, other counter abilities like that. But that Lightning Rod build has been an absolute joy to use, and I highly recommend trying it out to anyone who hasn't tried it yet. I don't know how, if at all, it'll synergize with later abilities. I still have to get Odin and presumably Shiva. Don't know that there's any other icons you can get abilities from other than those two based on where I'm at, but maybe there will be. Maybe I'll be able to incorporate them into the Lightning Rod build. I don't know, but either way, that's been an absolute blast of a build to use, and thank you for your question, King Tony. I appreciate it. Following up, we have Incompletionist, also a YouTube member, says, okay, this is a three-parter, but one overarching question. What are the 3 games that set you in motion as the kind of gamer you ended up being? Okay, we'll go through the whole question before I give any answers. First game you're introduced to and took to instantly. First game you beat, and first game that blew your mind. Of course, there could be 1 or 3 different games for all these categories. If it's the same game for more than one section, totally fine. I just find that these 3 tend to really set gamers on their paths and play styles. And then, to follow up on the what games, How would you describe each sensation? Gonna have to think about that one a little bit, but we'll start with the games themselves first. So, for the first game that I was introduced to and took to instantly, there's a lot of first games for me because I watched my dad play games growing up. I've talked about that on the channel before, in these videos, on stream, whatever. So I'm not sure what the first game is that I saw him playing. It might have been Secret of Mana on the Super Nintendo, but we did have a regular, like, classic Nintendo, and I very well could have seen Super Mario Brothers being played, but I don't really remember. I know we just had that. I'm going to say the first game I ever saw and took to was Secret of Mana. I think that's probably pretty accurate. And Secret of Mana I loved. Like, it's not a game that I've talked about enough on the channel, and it's not a game I've revisited in a long, long time. But in terms of unique, kind of active combat JRPG games with a cool world and isometric map and all sorts of weird, interesting, fun abilities with, like, the different elemental creatures that you could use, like Gnome and all that type of stuff, and just the weird items, like all the healing items were candy and chocolate, and that was so cool to me as a kid. I really, really enjoyed it. And I was able to play it with my dad. If you had two controllers, you could actually control two of the different characters simultaneously, two different people, and run around on the map and fight stuff. And that was a blast. I loved that. So Secret of Mana definitely was the first game I was interested in that I saw. But pretty close in there was stuff like, actually, I guess it wouldn't have been because this was all on the PS1. But other games that I remember very distinctly, well, there was Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo. That's another one. Another Super Nintendo game. We had a Sega that I know I played games on. There was the Lion King Sega game that I really, really enjoyed, but that I could never beat because no one could ever beat it because it was really hard. And then there was, like, Warcraft 2 on the PlayStation, Final Fantasy Tactics, of course, on the PlayStation, and a few other things like that. But yeah, I think the first one that sticks in my mind is Secret of Mana. As for the first game I beat, I was really bad at beating games when I was younger, and still am to a degree. Just because, like, I'll get distracted or fall off of them or something else will come out. That's part of why the channel is good, because it keeps me on task to actually finish games. But I think the first game I ever actually beat myself was probably Pokemon Blue, followed shortly thereafter by Pokemon Yellow, because I got them at the same time. But yeah, Pokemon, I think, definitely would have been the first game that I did actually beat. Again, because it was simple enough that I could understand it. It was handheld, so I could take it around with me wherever I wanted to go. And that was useful at a time when my mom was very restrictive on how much game time and screen time I could have. You know, she was one of those parents that was very much like 1 hour or 2 hours max a day is all you're allowed to have. And with a lot of those longer games, especially JRPGs and things like that, that was not a lot of time to be able to try and figure something out and beat it. You know, by the time you, like, started the game, remembered where you were, what you were doing, what the controls were, because you were a little kid. You didn't have this stuff stuck in your head, especially when you're learning all this stuff and going to school and you don't have full brain capacity yet. So and then you get stuck on one puzzle and you try to figure it out for a little while, you fight some enemies, and then it's, oh, but your time is up, you have to get off the game. So yeah, Pokemon was good because I was able to just take it around with me and play it when no one knew. And I was able to spend time with it and actually learn the game and come to understand it and make progress. So and again, it was my own. It wasn't me sharing a system with my dad. The Super Nintendo was his. The PlayStation was his. You know, like, he got those for himself, and then I was allowed to play games on it. But Pokemon, no one played but me. And I had all the time with it that I wanted, and that was great. So yeah, I think Pokemon is probably the first game that I beat. And then the first game that blew my mind absolutely has to be Final Fantasy Tactics. Like, as a kid, having, you know, stuff like A Link to the Past, Secret of Mana, Pokemon, whatever, those were all really cool. And they were complex and difficult to understand, but fun to learn for me, because I was like, what, 6, 7, 5, probably. But then Tactics comes along. And Tactics was one of those things that I could kind of tell it wasn't designed for me. Not necessarily that I wasn't supposed to be playing it. It's not like it's, you know, you're 6 and watching a slasher horror film and you're terrified but, like, excited, and you know it's like, oh, I'm not supposed to be doing this. This is exciting. Not like that, but just I understood enough to know that it was like I was here And Tactics was way up here in terms of its maturity and its writing. Like, it was a game that was explicitly made for fully developed minds, right? Extremely deep and complex mechanical systems, a very mature political story that resonates with adults today because of how well it was written and how maturely it was handled. Like, this whole sprawling story with all these different characters and big words and all this different stuff. But I understood it enough to be able to play it and to understand what was going on in terms of the game when I was watching my dad play it. Because, of course, that's how I was introduced to it. My dad was playing it and I would watch. And he had a black mage named after me, and it was super cute and very fun. But so we went through, and I never really understood the story or what was happening. I just had little glimpses, like little memories of things, until I went back and played it years and years later and played it through and beat the game for myself and everything. So I was probably 15, 16 at that point. And I understood how out of my element I was trying to interface with this game at the age that I was when it first came out, when my dad played it. I was actually insane. Like, there's no way I could have given it the appreciation and understanding that the game deserves when I first saw it, but it absolutely blew my mind, and it 100% crafted or molded the way I view games and interact with not just games, but all media going forward for the rest of my life. Like, I don't care what anyone has to say about it. Final Fantasy Tactics is like a foundational thing, a cornerstone in my life and in the way I view stuff. And that's, I mean, I love it. I think it absolutely deserves to have that kind of place in my life. So, and then, yeah, for the follow-up, how would you describe each sensation? So, the first game that I was introduced to and took to instantly, being Secret of Mana, there was a sense of wonder there because it felt like such an adventure, right? And I think I saw Secret of Mana before I saw A Link to the Past. And I know a lot of people describe Zelda games as being that type of game, that adventure, right? And trying to capture that feeling of being a kid and finding a cool cave in your backyard and exploring it with like a stick in your hand and the wonder that that entails, right? And Secret of Mana was that for me. You have these characters and this hero's journey where you find a sword and you get kicked out of your village and you have to go around and try and save the world, and there's weird monsters and different like groups of people and societies, and you can find magic, and there's creepy temples with monsters in it, but then goddesses and gods that give you new power, and you can find different types of weapons, and you can find party members that you travel with and start telling a story with together. That was so cool to me because I did a ton of reading as a kid, and I still did for a long time after I started playing games as well. It's not like they supplanted reading for me, but it gave me the same feeling that reading did. And I think that's part of the reason that I fell in love with it. It wasn't just like a game that you played to get high scores and to beat levels and things like that, which is what games started as for a lot of people, and that's fine. But it was about that world and that adventure, and that resonated with me a lot. So there was, I would say, a sense of adventure was how Secret of Mana felt to me. As for the first game that I beat in Pokemon, ecstatic triumph. It was so freaking hard to beat the Elite Four, man. Because, like, you know, I was a kid, I had, like, one Pokemon that was sufficiently strong. And mind you, that was my level 84 Pidgeot, who absolutely kicked ass. But, like, I didn't understand how types really worked. Like, you start to figure it out, and characters in the game explain it to you, but the idea of building a well-balanced team with a variety of different types of moves and everything to cover different issues, whatever, even all the way back in Gen 1 was still important, but you didn't know that. You know, that's why kids always wound up with a Charizard with 4 fire-type attacks, and that was it. Like, all the time that type of thing happened. So getting to the point where I could actually get through the Elite Four after this long journey, figuring out how the HMs work and figuring out how to beat Team Rocket and how to beat all the gym leaders and get through Victory Road. Just, oh my God, it was such an insane journey to finally get through the Elite Four, think that you had won, and then Gary is there. And you're like, oh no, not Gary, oh God. And then he's so hard. compared to pretty much anyone else in the game who wasn't Lance. And it was just like, oh my God. But then I did it. Then I finally did it. And it was such an achievement because I did it completely for myself. It wasn't a game that I had watched my dad play. It wasn't a game that he was helping me with or anything like that. I did it all on my own. And, you know, I had like the strategy guide and stuff like that. That helped, of course, in knowing like what Pokemon learned, what moves and stuff like that. But just doing that for myself and getting that victory was huge. Felt great. As for the game that blew my mind, I mean, I don't think I really need to describe Final Fantasy Tactics any more than I just did, describing it as a foundational cornerstone, essentially, of my personality. That is a game that, to this day, still fascinates me, and I love it. Jane started playing it recently on her own time because she has been wanting to play it since I told her about it, and we have friends who've played it, and people who know it talk about how it's one of the greatest games of all time, if not the greatest game of all time. I say that. And so she wanted to play it for herself, and she's obsessed. But just when she started the game and the intro music started, the emotional response that I had seeing the woman that I love interact with the single most influential piece of media I've ever experienced, those two worlds colliding, legitimately had an emotional effect on me that I was not expecting. So I don't think I really need to describe it any more than that. That's Tactics for me, for sure. So that was a long one, but thank you, Incompletionist. That was cool, figuring that whole question out. If anyone ever wants to do like multi-part questions like that, by all means, go for it in the future. Thank you. Moving on, though, we have James Grieve, who says, sorry, I haven't been around lately myself, which is totally fine. We all get busy, James. Don't worry about it. The question, though, is I'm wondering, are you going to be doing playthroughs and such for Baldur's Gate 3? And this is something that people have asked me before as well, and I've kind of been back and forth on if I was going to do it, if I wasn't going to do it, and I was never really sure. But hearing everything I've been hearing about the game and how massive it is and how involved it is, I think the answer is probably no. And not because I'm not interested in playing the game. I am. I'm absolutely interested in playing the game. I've talked before about how I did like 1.5 or really 1 3/4 full campaigns of Divinity Original Sin 2, the game that Larian Studios made before they started making Baldur's Gate 3, and which Baldur's Gate 3 is heavily inspired by, and loved it. Like, that was absolutely one of my favorite gaming memories. Going through that game with 3 of my buddies as a party and experiencing the whole thing was incredible. I loved every second of it. And I want to do that again with Baldur's Gate 3. But because Baldur's Gate 3 is so freaking ginormous from everything that's been said about it, I don't know that I can reasonably slot out the time on the channel for that, because I think it will just take over too much, you know? Like, I still have other stuff that I want to stream. I have other games that I want to do Let's Plays of. There's other scripted content that I've got that I just need to find the time to work on more, but I've got scripts for. I need to record stuff, edit stuff. And I have a lot of scripted guide content, discussion content, all that type of stuff in my head that I want to do that I haven't had the time to even do now. And that's without trying to set aside, I don't know, 100, 150, 200 hours to do a proper full streaming Let's Play of Baldur's Gate 3. And that's on top of the fact that trying to schedule it with 3 buddies, because I want to play it with a full party, just like we did with Divinity. I think it's only 4-player. Is it more? I don't know. But anyway, I don't see that ever being able to happen and have us finish the game in a timely manner. It's like when you're trying to do a D&D game, right? And anyone who's a tabletop enjoyer knows what I'm about to say. 75% of the challenge is just being able to schedule regular sessions where everyone or even the majority of the party can be there on a week-to-week or bi-weekly basis to keep the story moving forward, right? So doing that with a group of people who want to be playing this game while I can stream it, while also trying to do other stuff, I think it would fall apart very, very quick. And also, I don't want to try and have other people's enjoyment of the game be beholden to my streaming schedule. So if there is something I can figure out for it, then yes, I would love to. But I don't see that happening right now, unfortunately, especially with how jam-packed 2023 is in terms of gaming. So we'll see. But right now, I think the answer is probably no, unfortunately. But thank you for your question, James. I appreciate it. Canadia has the next question, and this one is going to be interesting. Canadia from my YouTube members asked this in Discord. Since you haven't played Xenoblade yet, I have a very important question to gauge your tastes. Pyra or Mythra? Now, Canadia is correct. I've never played a Xenoblade game. I've seen bits and pieces. I've seen like a little bit of Xenoblade 1 and a little bit of Xenoblade 3. I think both from streams of Canadia playing the game, actually, now that I think about it. But very, very minor. I know nothing about any of the characters. I know who Pyra and Mythra are, largely from them being in Smash. So I at least have an idea of who they are. I'll have Pyra as the redhead. I'll have her up like over here on the screen, I guess. And Mythra is the blonde over here on this side of the screen. For any of you who don't know who these characters are, like have even less knowledge than I do. And obviously, for reasons that you can probably see based on their designs, there's a lot of fans, shall we say, of these characters. A lot of waifu wars about them, I suppose. If my understanding is they're like the same character or something, I don't know. There's something like that. They turn into one another in Smash. I don't know. I don't get it. But I know people typically who are Xenoblade fans have a preference for one or the other. So without knowing anything about who they are or what their role really is in the story or what their personalities really are or anything, just going off of the designs, I think I have to say Mythra. And the main reason is I've always been bothered by Pyra's like sort of weird poofy helmet hair. It looks weird. It's so wide. Like I look at it and it reminds me of like Hey Arnold's football head. And obviously like it's not a football head, but it's just so bloop. I don't know. It's very strange. It's always been off-putting for me. So I think by default, Mythra takes the win for me. Eventually, one of these days, maybe, as I just was talking about not having enough time to do a full Baldur's Gate playthrough, I do want to try to play Xenoblade on the channel. Someday, I know, I'm not trying to tease people. I just want it to be known that it is something I want to do, because I am interested in the overall game series. People hype it up to an insane degree. There's got to be something there that's worth seeing. I just haven't had the time. So maybe once I play Xenoblade 2, I think is the game that they're from, right? I think so. Maybe my opinion will change. I don't know. But for now, I'm going to say Mythra. So thank you for the question, Canadia. I hope that gives you the information you need to gauge my taste and I don't get judged too harshly for this. I don't know. Snap decision, man. Moving on, we have Caffeine System, who didn't exactly have a question, but I had an idea. So I'm going to read her statement here. She said, sorry, work was brutal this weekend and my brain was soup with a crying emoji. I couldn't think of a question. Not even a good question. Just couldn't think of one at all. No thoughts. Head empty. And that's okay, Caffeine. I understand. That's why I have a question for you. And for the rest of the people who are watching right now and who may be commenting. You mentioned soup. Well, why don't you tell me, Caffeine? What's your favorite kind of soup? And everyone else who's watching this, gotten to this part, maybe has the opportunity to put in a comment. Doesn't have to be a lengthy one. Doesn't have to be a full explanation. What's your favorite kind of soup? Do you even like soup? Or are you a anti-soup hater? Let me know. I'm not going to give you an answer on what my favorite soup is because the question wasn't for me. It's for all of you. I will give you a hint, though. It starts with fra and ends with yun. I expect to see lots of good answers in the comments. Thank you, Caffeine, for your question. And I hope you're doing better. I hope the next week of work treats you well. Moving on finally to IR Fine, who says, do the thing, which I know means that I've been given a wildcard question, as he is wont to do. And thank you for that, Rom. I appreciate that. So the final question that we're going to have for today is the wildcard question. And the number one, I guess, question, if not kind of discussion point, is why have we seen a turn towards so many Game of the Year contenders in 2023 that are from relatively unknown studios or studios that maybe wouldn't be considered mainstream or AAA up until this point, okay? And let me explain my kind of thought process behind that. Because right now, for me, there are 5 Game of the Year contenders. The first 2 are going to be obvious. The next 3 are kind of sleeper hits that really do, I think, have a chance to win and do not fit the normal mold of what AAA Game of the Year type stuff has been in the past. So first, and the one that's probably going to win, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Everyone says that Tears of the Kingdom is going to win. Everyone says that Tears of the Kingdom is Game of the Year. Fair enough. Fair enough. It's an impressive game. It hasn't grabbed me the way Breath of the Wild did, and I have not yet played more of it, really, from what you guys have seen me play. And even Jane, who's a super Zelda fan, has fallen off of Tears of the Kingdom in favor of playing Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy Tactics. So it's not my personal Game of the Year, but I do understand everyone who loves it and who's going to vote for it for Game of the Year, and that it is probably going to get Game of the Year. But so that's Tears of the Kingdom. Final Fantasy 16. This is my Game of the Year as of right now. FF16 is an absolute marvel. It's an incredible piece of storytelling, incredible combat, phenomenal character designs, a beautiful game, incredibly well voice acted. 10 out of 10 across the board, except maybe a 9 out of 10 for some of the pacing of the side quests that I've been getting to. Absolutely phenomenal game. Will it beat Tears of the Kingdom? Probably not. But it's great. And I think it absolutely deserves the win if it gets it. And it 100% deserves to be in the running. Those are kind of the two obvious ones, right? Like, it's Zelda and Final Fantasy. Those games have won Game of the Year, I think. Has a Final Fantasy game ever won Game of the Year, actually? I don't know. I'm pretty sure Breath of the Wild won Game of the Year at the very least. Huh. I don't actually know. But anyway, I mean, they're two titans of the genre. People know Final Fantasy. People know Zelda. People who don't play games know these games, right? So it's not that surprising that they have new entries that are very, very well received that are going to be in the running. Cool. There's 3 more. First of all, Remnant 2. A lot of people have been saying Remnant 2 is their personal Game of the Year and could be in the running for Game of the Year. And I agree with that. Remnant 2 is phenomenal. It is the original game taken, refined, cleaned up, extra money thrown at it, extra assets thrown at it, and it's incredible. Everyone who's touched it thinks it's phenomenal. It's sold 1 million copies in the first 4 days, and it's a AA production. It is not AAA. It's made by Gunfire Games, incredibly talented people, not a group that I would describe as a AAA studio at all. There's no loot boxes. There's no battle passes. The game is $50 at base in an era where most games are trying to push for 70 nowadays. It's got full co-op. It's got all these different features, a bunch of free updates planned, a bunch of DLC planned, feature complete right at the start, packed to the gills with incredible combat, awesome enemy designs, awesome weapon designs, awesome class designs, awesome world designs, incredible music, all this insane stuff. And no one saw it coming. No one saw it coming. And yet suddenly it has taken the world by storm and everyone's playing it. Everyone's talking about it. And many people have seriously said it is going to be their Game of the Year and should be in the running for Game of the Year. Insane. Absolutely insane. Next up, again, Baldur's Gate 3 was already mentioned. I would argue, again, not a AAA production. It has that level of quality, but it's not by any of the big-wig studios, right? Not at all. But it is a game made with incredible passion, incredible artistry from incredibly talented people in the industry who are just making the type of game that they want to make. And it's so good and so big that big, scary AAA devs from big, scary AAA studios have been sweating and talking about how, oh, well, Baldur's Gate 3 shouldn't be the standard. It's too good. You can't expect that from other games. It's like, why? They did it. Why can't you? Maybe something just needs to change with the current AAA landscape that's causing problems and not allowing games to be made to their full capacity. Which is kind of the topic. We'll get to that in a second. Finally, Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon. This is going to be kind of a contentious one, I think. Largely because mecha is such a niche thing, right? It was one thing for FromSoft to come out with a bunch of dark fantasy or even like gothic fantasy, swords and sorcery, action RPG stuff. Those are all fairly safe, well understood, well appreciated genres and tropes in fantasy or in media and in gaming. Pretty easy. Having then their personal style and flair and design sense and overall sense of quality it makes sense why those games exploded in the way that it did, culminating most recently in Elden Ring. Armored Core is a little different because there's not nearly as much of an audience for giant screaming metal death traps beating the ever-loving hell out of each other and tearing each other apart in a post-apocalyptic, corporation-riddled landscape. Not as much. It's there, but it's not as much. And yet, the level of quality that we've seen for everything from Armored Core 6 thus far, from all the marketing material, and the sheer reputation now that FromSoft has, especially after the absolute smash hit that Elden Ring was, makes me confident that there's going to be a lot of eyes on Armored Core 6, and a lot of people who may not be generally into mecha action or anything to do with mechs, who try it anyway and come to love it. And so because of that, and because of FromSoft's bar of quality that they've always had, I do think there's going to be a lot of serious discussion for Armored Core 6 for Game of the Year. Now, once the game comes out, maybe there'll be issues with it. Maybe there'll be some sort of like actual problems with the development that cause the game to be not as good as it could be. Maybe it just won't resonate with people as much. I don't know. But I do think it could potentially be in the running. And so those are the 5. And it's interesting, right? Because again, I would say FromSoft is not AAA. They are not an independent studio. They're published under Bandai Namco, of course, but they are kind of their own entity in a lot of the same way that Gunfire Games are and Larian Studios are. And while you could say the same thing kind of about Square Enix is a monolith of the industry and has been for, longer than I've been alive, right? And same thing for Nintendo. Longer than a lot of us have been alive for both of those companies. And these franchises have also been around longer than a lot of us have been alive. And I'm almost 32. So, like, they don't need to be an EA or an Activision or an Ubisoft or whatever to have their games be incredibly successful. They've got the money, they've got the talent, they've got the brand. These other studios are way more underdoggy, and they've got money. They've had successful projects in the past. They've got a devoted fan base. They've got the things that they need to make things that are incredibly successful without the shackles that typical AAA gaming has. And I think that's why we're seeing so many, what I'm describing as more AA in terms of the studios, come to the fore and potentially be winning Game of the Year. I'm just a guy talking on the internet, so if you disagree, that's totally fine. But I think that we're seeing the response where people are so tired of the AAA nonsense, the broken releases, the broken promises, the terrible performance, the absolute state of monetization, the terrible attitude of developers, all this different stuff that has caused people to become very disillusioned with franchises and in some cases the gaming landscape as a whole that they're used to. And that's where we have this gap, this crack in the armor, where smaller studios with quote-unquote smaller projects, there's nothing small about Remnant, Armored Core 6, or especially Baldur's Gate, but you know what I mean, less overblown, overdeveloped projects to slip in and show the passion, show the love, show the creativity that caused everyone to fall in love with gaming 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I'm hoping, against all hope, that that's a continuing trend that we see over the years to come. Even if none of those 3 games that I'm describing as our underdogs win, I'm hoping their raw success opens the eyes of a lot of these huge game companies and makes them realize that there's actually a way to be successful and make stock number go up without absolutely scraping the bottom of the gutter in terms of quality and goodwill, as so many companies have been. So, yeah, I think that's my wild card question, kind of a little bit of a question discussion about how we wound up in this situation where we've got titans of the genre like Zelda and Final Fantasy quite possibly competing for Game of the Year with like Remnant, which is basically unknown prior to this, Baldur's Gate 3, which is just coming out the gate swinging for the fences, and Armored Core 6, a mecha genre from a company that I remember when Dark Souls 1 was a niche title that barely anyone had even heard of, and look at them now. How times change, right? So let me know your thoughts on that and on all of the rest of my answers for all of these questions in the comments below. If you have any questions and you are a YouTube member or a patron, Queue them up now. I will be asking in the coming weeks, both on YouTube in the community tab and on Discord in the members tab, or the supporters tab, I should say, to gather those questions. You've got a month ahead of you to figure out what it is that you would like to ask. And if you're not a patron or you're not a YouTube member and you want to be able to ask a question and you want to be able to support me directly, links again in the description for YouTube memberships and Patreon. But thank you all for your questions. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I'm going to end this one here, go record some Final Fantasy VI for y'all. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other.